So this is all about the layers of scene. And I wrote out some notes this morning and I counted them out, and there's 12 layers, which is really like multiple layers. But there's 12 layers that I really think about when I'm starting to get into a scene. And the reason I decided to talk about this today is I was going through a recent scene. I was writing, in my current work in progress, and I was doing this scene, and I got stuck, and I really had to break it down to figure out why this scene wasn't feeling right. And I don't get stuck very often now, because I kind of know all my processes, but this one really stumped me. And it wasn't so much that I didn't know what happened. It wasn't that the characters were like way out to lunch. It was really just this one small piece that, and probably if I'd left it, it would have been okay. But it was this one small piece that I just really was missing, that was making the scene feel incomplete and feel not, just not good, just not right at the end of the day. And so again, I really needed to like pause, step back, break it down, and try and figure out what it was that was making it not feel right. So of course, we know that scenes are there to advance the plot, and we know that every scene should advance the plot. Otherwise, it doesn't have much purpose in the story. If it's not doing something for the main plot, for the main story problem, it's just sort of this extra fluffy bit and doesn't belong. And so when I say, it must advance the plot, we know something must change, right? Otherwise there's no reason for the scene to be there. And specifically, I'm talking about having either an action that the hero takes, with some sort of obstacle involved, or the result of an action that they already took with a new crisis on the line. So we're either having a character that's struggling to do something, or having a character that's struggling with the aftermath of something that they've done. And so that's kind of the blanket advice that gets given, and that's really super advice. It's super important to do that, but at the end of the day, there is a lot more, I think, that we can be thinking about with our scenes to really just take them to the next level. So let me throw some slides up. I even had time to do that. So there are 3 scene layers, so layers that are specific to a scene. And so, like we just talked about, we always need to know how the scene advances the story, right? What happens, what changes. Something is always changing related to that main story problem, and we need to know what that is, and we need to make sure that that is clear in the scene that we're writing. We also need to know what part of the story this scene is in and what it needs to do. So really what I mean is when we look at story structure, there's a certain feel to each section of a story. There's a certain way, there's a certain twist or way that things change that helps move the story along and helps the story feel intriguing to the reader, feel good to the reader. And so, prime example, the inciting incident is always going to be an impossible choice. And the real purpose of that is that, you want that protagonist to be shown both as a victim. So it's an impossible choice because they are going to go do something that they really don't want to do. We're showing them as a victim, but we're also showing them as an active character, right? So they still have to make a choice. They still have to choose to do the thing, but they're choosing to do the thing only because it was the least bad decision or the least bad choice that they could make in the circumstances. And so that's really what the scene is doing, in the inciting incident, is it's taking, for the reader in their experience, they are seeing that character in a new light, and they are seeing, this, they're a victim. What a horrible circumstance. What a what a unfortunate thing to happen to them. But also look how strong they are. Look how much of an active character they are for making that choice. And we also get to see their values. We get to see their different goals and motivations butt up against each other, and we really learn in that scene who the core of this character is. And so that's the purpose of that inciting instance. So if you're writing a scene, if you're writing your inciting instance scene, 12% into your novel, you know that you need to hit those points. That is the type of feel that you need to be generating. And a little bit of a nuance there, really, just to understand what things to bring out and what things to just sort of leave a little bit in the background. It's not going to be as impactful and inciting instant if they have to make this choice, but we're not highlighting the motivations, the goals. We're not highlighting how it is an impossible choice for them. Right. And the third thing that I really think we need to think about, specific to the scene itself, is knowing how the hero changes in relation to the goal and in relation to their belief system, right? So stories are all about a belief shift. We've got a character who starts out, they've made some sort of impossible choice and taken on the story problem. They have a goal of how they're going to solve it. And as we go through the story, at some point, that goal is actually going to be modified in some way, and their belief system is going to change. They're always stuck in the beginning. They're stuck in survival mode because they have a certain set of beliefs that are keeping them there. And what we want to do in the story is move them to thriving, move them to a much better state of life, whatever genre you're writing. That's going to be a little bit different. But we're moving them from point A to point B. And there's all of these micro steps that happen in between. So we're also understanding, when we know what part of the story is, we also need to be understanding what is happening with that goal and what is happening with that belief system. So the belief system is always being challenged. And so from scene to scene, where are they between the initial goal the initial belief and the final belief system? Are they still firmly in that beginning belief and they're just sort of like muscling their way through, sort of hard-headed, trying to stick with, really trying to get things back to status quo? Or are they at a point where they're starting to question whether their belief is correct? Are they at a point where they're starting to question if a different belief might be correct? Where are they? And the example is the midpoint. The midpoint is always a moment where the true nature of the conflict is revealed. But what it's also doing is that's usually the moment where the hero is actually starting to question their goal and their belief system. And they go through a series of processes to kind of get there. It's not that the goal changes at this point. That's not what it's doing. But as we're writing the scene, we can bring out a little bit of, I don't know if that's quite if that's quite 100% where I want to be going. And so just things to be aware of in regards to the scene itself and the scene as part of the story and what it's doing. Right. And then we also have what I call character layers, because it's really about what the character is experiencing and all of the different layers that we have to include there. So we always have the physical layer, right? So that's what we can see. That's the actions that a character is taking. That's the physical stuff. If you were watching a movie, this is what would be on the screen. But we also know that this is really just the tip of the iceberg, right? We know that that is the 10% that we can see that is supported by everything that's underneath the surface. And so underneath the surface, there's always the mental level, right? That's what the character is thinking. And if you've got a close viewpoint, if you're writing, first person, or if you're writing third person close, you may share some of those actual thoughts. You might, in italics, you know, whatever it is that they're thinking. Otherwise it's implied for the reader, just because of other things that have happened previously. Your character overhears a conversation, um, and the reader, of course, is privy to that. So the reader is getting the same information as the character does. And so the hero's overheard a conversation, then we're seeing in the next scene through that particular lens of understanding, and your reader's going to have that same lens of understanding because they've experienced the same things. But we need to be aware of what it is that the character themselves is thinking, because that's going to inform their actions, right? And often we get to see what they're thinking only through action, which is, a hesitation here, an eyebrow quirk there. We just see these things through the little actions that they have, but we need to understand what's underlying that, what the layer is underneath, making sure that we're also adding that layer underneath of what it is that we're thinking. There's also the emotional layer. So under the surface, we've got mental, we've got emotional, which is what the character is feeling, right? That's their body sensation, and sometimes through those little eyebrow quirks again. So emotional state, and very much how that emotion is showing up in their body, what it is that they are experiencing. And so again, recognizing what that emotional state is for them, what it is that they're feeling. And under the surface too, probably even deeper than these others, is the spiritual layer. And I borrowed these terms from sort of personal development kind of stuff. And so spiritual isn't really, it's not religious at all. It's really just saying, what does the character believe, right? It's their belief system and the way that they think the world works in general. Sometimes religion can be part of that, but not really what we're discussing here today. The biggest thing with the spiritual level is that limiting belief that holds them back, that belief that is going to shift. So again, we're looking at that belief shift. The core of story is always the belief shift. And this layer is so deep that it's really very subtle. And to me, it really comes through in their thoughts and in their actions and the way that they feel, which really means that we need to have a very good understanding of what the belief is in order to properly share it with the reader, right? So you're never going to write, you're never going to write in the prose itself, at this point he believed that he was a useless human being destined to fail. You're going to write thoughts, you're going to write, nothing ever works out for me. You're going to write some actions. He rolls his eyes whenever somebody tells him to be hopeful. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we understand that layer. We know what that layer is, what that layer is doing at that time, and then we can share it from there. We can bring it out to the surface. Right. And then we add on to this, a few layers of personality. And so one is the character's personality, that character voice, their unique take on the world, how they experience it, how they share it. The other is your author voice or your unique personality, how you share things, how you write a story, which becomes that's your brand. That's who you are as an author, and that's really what your readers like about you. That's why they pick your book over the millions of others that are available on Amazon, right? They know your voice, they enjoy your voice, and they look for that voice from you. So making sure that you are aware of the type of personality that normally comes through in your writing. And if you've got multiple pen names, being aware of which personality kind of comes through in each pen name. And it shifts a little bit because each, it's sort of like each writer has a personality, each story has a personality, and each character has a personality. And just being cognizant of the many layers there that are going to come through. And of course, don't forget that there are multiple characters in a story, and in each scene, there's multiple characters either present or at least having an impact on the scene, right? And so each of those characters has their own set of layers. There's multiple subplots. So there's the main story problem, but you've probably got a few other things that are going on. Each of those subplots is going to have its own layers, its own belief shift, and subplots, a good subplot is always present in the story. We know that the main story has to, every scene has to impact that main story. Otherwise, there's no point in it being there. But your subplots are going to be weighing on your character's mind in most scenes, if not every scene. And so just being cognizant of that, keeping all of those pieces spooling and in your head as you're going through and writing your story. And then of course we've also got, just world and setting pieces, things that are moving independently. If you've got like weather systems or a natural disaster happening, it's something that moves independently, but it's still affecting the protagonist, it's still affecting the story. And so you need to be aware of those layers and what they're doing. I'm not a huge fan of having a ton of things that are moving independently, but we exist in the world. The character exists in the world, and the world is doing things that are out of our control, that are adjacent to our story, but maybe not necessarily part of it. And just again, being really just cognizant of all of the moving pieces that are happening. And it really is a lot. It's like playing 3D chess. You've got all of the scene stuff coming in this way, you've got the character stuff this way, then there's the author and the reader, and there's all of these things that are coming in all at the same time that really need to be kept track of. So um and that's really why I get kind of obsessed about, the idea of creating a story by first having, your idea, then you go through this big planning process. You start learning about your characters, you learn about the world, you start figuring out all of those, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual stuff in regards to your character. You start thinking about your different plots, your subplots. Then you actually put together an actual plot of how the story works, how it is moving forward, how all of those pieces interconnect. And that way, when you sit down to do the actual writing, the only thing you need to do is figure out how to share the layers. You're not trying to create those layers as you go. You're not trying to explode your brain trying to figure out all of these pieces coming together. It's really about making your life simpler and not harder. I think that's my whole goal, is just making life more simple. And so yeah, and for me, just going back to the scene that I was writing where it really just felt off. And what happened was, I knew 99% of what was going on because I had done all of the planning. I knew the characters, I knew the world, I knew what was happening, I knew how things were changing. And specifically just knowing, the characters were still doing things that were authentic to them. The characters were still making choices that made sense given all of their experiences. Um, but but I had lost touch, very specifically, of, with this scene, how the scene was affecting the main character's goal. That's what it ended up being. And so again, I knew what my goal was for the scene. I knew what I needed to have change. I knew how the characters were thinking, how they were acting. I knew why they were going to get to this sort of endpoint. Everything lined up. And again, it wasn't like I had them doing weird things that were out of character and just trying to get them to where I wanted them to get in this scene, but the way that I shared the scene was off. So the way that I shared the scene was a little bit off because I'd forgotten that really deep layer. And it wasn't that, the physical stuff didn't really change. but it was more about where I put this emphasis versus that emphasis. Um, and and really, I mean, the difference was essentially which thoughts I shared, um, and how to get the right feel for this part of the story, right? So just lots of very, very nuanced stuff that I wanted to talk about today. And so I really just think, hopefully, I guess that's been some interesting some interesting things for you to think about when you're writing or editing your next scene. And often this can be an editing level thing.